Hello and welcome to Rings Check. I'm Barry and we are entering the third age of the channel. Now I know that the first and second age were quite brief, but I figured rather than just watching me haphazardly play through some scenarios, what might add some value and something I always wanted somebody else to do for me and be the change that you want to see is to talk through the scenarios, go over the story, where it fits into the story. In this instance I'm also going to incorporate the deck that I'll be using, and that will be a thematic based deck as best as possible. Of course there have to be some concessions to being able to beat the quest and solve the puzzle, and having a deck that works. You know, if you only played thematic cards you would struggle quite a lot with quite a lot of the quests. So in this series, my intention is to go through what all the cards are within the scenario, explain where they fit into the story, what the story of the game is trying to tell, and through the cards, and go over some of the deck that I'm going to use. A second video, as I say, will be me playing the scenario, and hopefully I can defeat it using that thematic deck. So I will put some background music on. Hopefully that's not too overwhelming, but you can still hear it. And I will talk about the first scenario in the Lord of the Rings saga, A Shadow of the Past. That is the title of the second chapter of the first book, and the one where we discover that Bilbo's ring is in fact the One Ring. Now at this point Bilbo's left and Frodo owns Bag End. And Bag End is the starting location for the scenario, and as part of leaving, I've included parting gifts in my deck. Bilbo and Frodo. I guess Hobo, now that Bilbo doesn't have a house. Leaves some gifts. Those less fortunate in the Shire, he leaves some very nice gifts for things he can use, and those that he doesn't like quite so much, he leaves them with humorous labels for each. And during this chapter, Gandalf and Frodo make plans for him to take the One Ring to Rivedell. And they're going to do this after his 50th birthday, and he's going to do it under the guise of selling Bag End and going to live with relatives in Buckland. Now Sam overhears all this and is roped into the plan while he's dropping some eaves. And part of the plan is that they will travel, or Frodo will travel under an assumed name, Mr. Underhill. And that is because the fewer people that know where he's going and what he's doing, the less likely he is to attract the attention of the enemy. So Gandalf hangs about in the Shire for a couple of months before departing suddenly after the plan's been finalised, but just before his birthday, and promises to be back in time for the party. Now, as part of going, Sam is going to obviously accompany Frodo, and he tells Rosie that he'll be leaving, and she's not happy about it. And in the future, you know, when everybody else has given up on them returning, Rosie still holds out hope, and that's actually going to be my excuse for why I include Rosie in sort of every version of this deck going forward. She is back in the Shire, holding out hope for Sam and Frodo to return. Give me a second, need to sneeze. No edits, we're doing it live. So, of course, Gandalf did not return in time, and here we get our first burden. Of course, Mr. Underhill being a boon and burden, which is one of the mechanics of the scenario. And with Gandalf's delay, they have to set off anyway, right? They can't wait any longer. They have to go. Gandalf's not back, and after his birthday. As part of travelling, Pippin is going to go with Sam and Frodo, at least as far as Buckland. Merry's gone on ahead with, you know, the cart of stuff, and Pippin, Sam and Frodo are going to walk, try and confuse people what way they're leaving and what direction they go in. But as they're going to leave, Frodo overhears Gaffer Gamgee talking to somebody at the end of his pathway, telling a stranger that he's already moved to Buckland And so this was the Black Rider. Okay, so have you seen Baggins? Actually, technically this is a picture of Farmer Maggot, so it's when Farmer Maggot is talked to, so I'm going to just move that card down the bottom here. So it's a Black Rider that Gaffer Gamgee is talking to. So the Black Riders are aware of Baggins Shire, after torching the ring's whereabouts from Gollum. But Gaffer Gamgee gives up nothing, says he's gone, says Sam's gone, and actually seems genuine in that, as he's a little surprised when he speaks to Sam later, saying, "Oh, I thought you'd already left." So he wasn't exactly covering, but I doubt he would have given the information up freely anyway. So Sam, Pippin and Frodo, the eponymous Three is company, and that is the first quest stage in this scenario, leave Hobbiton under the cover of darkness. They leave in their hobbit cloaks and they travel through Greenhill country towards Woody End. The plan being to meet Merry in a couple of days in Crick Hollow, which is in Buckland, and spend the night just out in the open in the Woody End there. So the next morning, as they're travelling along the road, they hear hoofs, right, coming down the road towards them, and they think it's Gandalf, because of course Gandalf promised to be back in time. But Frodo fears it's not. His intuition is that it's perhaps not Gandalf, and so they choose to hide in a hollow away from the road. And Frodo was right to do so. Turns out it is a Black Rider who stops and sniffs the air nearby. And then while he's doing this, the ring tempts Frodo to put it on, but he manages to resist, and the Black Rider leaves the hobbits. So one card here is just Black Steed. It's not it's an attachment for one of the Nazgul, the Black Riders, but that just kind of seems appropriate in there. And so that evening, the hobbits plan to make camp, and once again they hear hooves approaching, only this time there's no opportunity to hide. And then as the shadowy figure draws near, crawling towards them, there's singing in the air, which seems to drive off the pursuer. And this is where the group meet Gildor and Glorian, right, who invites them to join them for the evening, after Pippin mentions those earlier close encounters with the hooded rider. Seems very interested in looking after them. Now Gildor knows a little bit about the quest to some degree. He's met Bilbo a couple of times, but he doesn't know the details there. But he could join, and so this is a potential boon. If he comes out of the deck, he'll come into the player area and be on your side for the remainder of the quest. So then we sort of shortcut to mushrooms. Now shortcut to mushrooms is somewhat muddled between chapter 3, chapter 4 within the scenario. It's not a even delineation here. The shortcut to mushrooms basically brings the Black Rider into play, right? But actually, shortcut to mushrooms isn't until after they've met Gildor. And one of the cards I put in my deck here is Halfling Determination, and here this is where Sam and Frodo discuss kind of where they're at and what's going on, and Frodo realises just what a good friend he has in Sam, and how Sam will see him to the end. So this card is thematic very much for the whole adventure, but in particular this is kind of where they're discussing that you'll see it through to the end. So eventually they reach Bamfurlong, which is the home of Farmer Maggot and his 3 dogs, Fang, Grip and Wolf. Now these dogs are a terror to trespassers like Pippin and Merry, but you may not be familiar with these 3 cards, Fang, Grip and Wolf. These are from a long extended party, and they're technically unofficial, but they are been the work of the community driven kind of project, and they are incorporated into Rings DB and Dragon cards here. And so if you don't have access to these and you want to play the deck, you could swap them out for 3 Loyal Hounds, which is what they were in the real set and the FFG release stuff. But if you do have access to a long extended party, you can swap them out for these, and actually in terms of the deck, balances the colours a little better. But after meeting with Farmer Maggot, he takes them inside and tells them about strangers on the road searching for baggins and offering gold for information. So this is where this card should have been at the start. But Farmer Maggot just threatened to set his dogs on them, and off the Black Rider went. So Farmer Maggot invites the party in for dinner and says he'll take them to the ferry as it's already late. If they're going by foot, it'll take them just as long as coming in for dinner and getting a lift by cart. So later on they travel, but they travel by darkness. They don't put any lamps on, they don't want to attract any attention. And again, before long they hear hooves on the road, and Frodo hides under in the back of the cart. A voice calls out wanting baggins, only this time it's Merry, who's been looking for the group because it's starting to get a little bit misty, a little bit foggy, and he wants to make sure that the guys are alright. And so that foursome now, so now you've got, you know, the beginnings of the Fellowship. Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin carry on themselves. Farmer Maggot goes back home to his wife and kids, and they continue on along, taking a shortcut through the marsh and over the Stockbrook, finally to reach the Buckleberry Ferry. And so you've got the final escape to Buckland here. Now, unlike the movies, the group reach Buckleberry Ferry without any trouble, and actually they don't see a hooded figure. If you can see just between... I can't keep this open, but if you look at where the mouse is on the card, and then look in the card a little bit more, you can see the hooded figure back on the shore, looking at them over the jetty. So they only see it when they're already afloat on the Brandywine. So at that point they reach Crick Hollow and arrive at Frodo's new house. They are meeting Fatty Bolger. Now unfortunately Fatty Bolger only has Spirit Hero card, or I think he might have a lower hero card, but he's only got hero cards, so I can't include him in the deck. But they arrive there, Fatty Bolger greets them, and they hope that the guards will keep the rider at bay at the North Gate. That evening they talk, and it seems as if all of the Shire knows their plan. And so here I've chose to include Cautious Halfling and Curious Brandybuck, as people were just keen to see kind of what's going on. They kind of know that Frodo's moving. Could definitely be included as thematic cards. But as they discuss and how they're going to continue, now that people kind of know what they're doing, they talk about moving through the Old Forest to continue their journey. But that is the next quest, 1.1, the Old Forest, and so we'll go over that a little more in detail then. So there's a few cards in the encounter deck that don't show up in these chapters, and let's go through those. Now the reason, again, remember it's a game, some of these sets are reused in or some of these cards are reused in other scenarios. However, a couple of the specific ones to the Shadow of a Past here is the initial burden that you could end up with, and that is the ring draws them. So this is not said until the party meet Strider and Bree and a Knife in the Dark, so that's, you know, next scenario effectively. Neither is Road Like a Gale, that's also in the A Knife in the Dark, but this should reappear in that scenario, so that's fine. They have to include it. I would like just, you know, every scenario being unique and specific, but I have to make some concessions as well for it, as I said, being a game and reusing some elements as we go through. Pathless Country here, that is not mentioned until Flight to the Ford, which is the third scenario in the original Fellowship box. Again, spoken about by Strider. And interestingly, there's actually a few other places and named areas in these first 4 chapters of the book. So this will also show up again later, and just a concession to being a kind of generic location. Piercing Cry seems to be more likely inspired, I'd say inspired by the movies. Obviously the sounds of the Nazgul in the movies being quite iconic. It's no Godzilla roar, but still something that you would recognise instantly. Really the only reference to that sort of piercing cry is in the Siege of Gondor, where the fell beast stooping to kill some soldiers, routing them, but this piercing cry is mentioned. But it just kind of goes to show I think the movies do a good job of this, like just kind of show how terrifying that the Nazgul are, and how they sound so terrifying to the bones, kind of thing. You really fear what a piercing cry means there. So I don't mind that kind of being in here. And then Evil Crow. This is just a generic agent of the enemy. We know that Sauron uses crows to spy, and we see them later once they get through the Mines of Moria. But it can be assumed, Miss Moneypenny? It can be assumed that there's crows around in the Shire. If you look at the art even there, it does show sort of lush fields, and it could be floating about the Shire. So let's look a little bit at some of the cards that I'm using in my thematic deck. Things that maybe don't expressly fit, and some that are just, I need to be able to complete the quest, I just have to put them in. So we'll look at these as well. So I'm including the Shire folk, and the group are helped all along the way by Shire folk. Gaffer Gamgee helps, Farmer Maggot in particular, Confound the Black Riders, not sure at this point, as they're hunting for Frodo. Resourceful is just a card that kind of represents an abundance of resources. There's no shortage in this first stage of the story. They're meeting people, they're being fed, they've got whole backpacks full of food. There's no hardship at this point, so resourceful kind of fits in. Of course, the art you could also argue here that resourceful, they're finding food on the way. Here we've got a picture of someone skinning conies. Feint is kind of needed, as getting caught by a Black Rider, particularly with your pants down, is trouble. And I kind of approach the card as being running and hiding rather than deliberately kind of feinting an attack to have it miss you. So again, where there's a slight disconnect between the theme, the art, the action that it gives, there's definitely still theme to be found, but you kind of have to look for it. The feint can't be used in the scenario I just described. The art can't show both that and what it does show in terms of the combat. So you've got to kind of look for theme a little bit sometimes in these cards, and that goes for the whole game to some degree. I think the game is very thematic, but sometimes you do have to be willing to work within your imagination to get there. Self-preservation. Now this is one of the more expensive healing options, and particularly when it comes to hobbits who only really have 2 hit points to start with. So there's only 1 copy in here to put on Sam, and that just helps him not die horribly if I have to fight a ring wraith and a hit gets through. Now here is a lesson in caution. You maybe not seen this card, it's another unofficial card, but fits right in here. You can see them hiding from the Black Rider, and it's one of the few thematic cards that have a little bit of card draw or card cycling. In this case, plays into the secrecy kind of theme for the deck as well. But if you don't have this, you can replace it with Campfire Tales. And now Robin Smallburrow doesn't technically appear until the Scouring of the Shire, where he's been working as sheriff in the Shire, but we can assume that he was also working when the the party left, he'd be in and around the Shire. So I've not included him anywhere in the kind of storytelling element, but we can assume that he's around there. His ability itself actually doesn't do anything unless you're playing with a spirit player, but he's just another hobbit to kind of put out as needed. Now the last three are the biggest deviations. These are the ones I can't fully justify putting in thematically. Let's move Fellowship of the Ring up one. Now Fellowship of the Ring obviously is the 9, and not until the Secret Council of Elrond up there is a fellowship formed. However, we already have the basis of the fellowship with the 4 hobbits, and your real problem here is that the fellowship sphere has so few cards. There's very little that can excuse me, with Frodo's resources. Have to put in something. It's a very powerful card, and can really help with questing, so it's something that is, kind of needed. Now if you're absolutely against using Fellowship of the Ring here, you could swap in a couple of Friend of Friends. And that's a little bit more on theme, in as much as it's generic enough that you could swap it, as it can apply to any point in the book, again despite the art being going up Mount Doom. Now Fast Hitch isn't until the Taming of Smeagol, where the rope, the elven rope comes loose, and they're all surprised and thinks it maybe snapped or whatever. But standing hobbits is pretty crucial. Restanding hobbits is pretty crucial for the deck, and it's an absolute core component of any hobbit deck, and so I think you just have to kind of go with it. I'm sure they tie some knots at various points throughout the story. There's not a lot of replacements here. You can add the Horn Call of Buckland if you have a long extended party, although I'm not sure that happens till a little bit later anyway, but it does happen before Fast Hitch. Sorry, Horn Call of Buckland being when the Black Riders try and find Baggins in Buckland. And finally, the Dagger of the Westernesse. These aren't found until Fog on the Barrow Downs, which is a couple of scenarios away, but there's really not enough weapons in the game to not have this, and every other weapon is equally unthematic, and this is the one you want. Again, it's very useful in a Hobbit deck, just because of the additional damage from engaging enemies with a higher threat level. So that is the story of kind of where it is. This is the story the cards are trying to tell us. Now the chances of them all coming out in this perfect order are slim to none, and so sometimes it's nice when it does happen and you can understand where you're playing and what you're doing in there, but that is the story so far. I'm going to make another video where we'll go through playing the scenario with this deck, and I'll put everything up on RingsDB and make sure people can follow. I'll put in the description, and hopefully this is useful for some people. As I said, I was always hoping that somebody would go through what the story the cards are telling, where I would be at any given point when playing a scenario, and starting with the saga stories is much easier because obviously they follow the story. So I'm away for a few days. It is the UK Games Expo tomorrow, but I'll be back the week after. If I'm going to go through scenarios like this, might take me a little longer, so I won't be uploading sort of one a day like I was doing just there, or one every couple of days. It might take a little longer, but please bear with me, and if it is useful for you, let me know in the comments. Until next time, this is Rings Check signing off.